Hey everyone, this is Mike Del Preti, and you're listening to Context, special on-the-road edition of my podcast, where I'm talking to industry leaders about what's changing in real estate. My guest today is Steve Sanders. Hey, Steve.
Hello, how are you?
Great. So Steve is a fellow I bumped into here in Boulder who also, like me, teaches at CU Boulder and teaches classes in marketing and brand. And that's kind of your professional history, right? So you've been in the room when big players like Zillow are thinking about their marketing and launching an iBuyer, and you've been in the room when players like Pacaso are thinking about how they brand themselves to kind of position themselves in the market.
Correct.
So we're here at a coffee shop. I mean, I always ask folks how they start the day. How do you typically start your working day?
Coffee. It always needs to be coffee. Coffee shop, coffee at home, coffee on the road. I need that. And I purposely wake up earlier than my family so that I have at least a half hour of quiet, contemplative coffee time.
Yeah. What kind of coffee do you like?
Drip.
Yeah.
Local coffee company here called Dazbog.
Oh, yeah.
I like.
Yeah.
Former KGB blend, now KO blend, because of the tensions in Eastern Europe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but their coffee is good. No actual ties to Russia. They just, unfortunately for them, chose a Russian theme and then changed it all up.
Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Drip coffee.
So tell me about your background in real estate and marketing.
Yeah, so my career, I started in advertising. I was in advertising for many years. Sort of a story in several geographies. 10 years in New York, 10 years in Richmond, Virginia, the advertising hotbed of the world. Then here in Boulder, then Los Angeles. Los Angeles was the end of advertising, where I transitioned into the next phase of my career, consulting. And it was a nice and easy transition because I went from working at an agency in Los Angeles to immediately consulting with all of my clients. And that was my first foray into the in-house side, which I then parlayed into true in-house work for Pacaso and Pathway and others.
So when we first met, we chatted a lot about Zillow and in particular the iBuying operation.
Yes.
Kind of you were around. I mean, you worked for Zillow. Well, you worked for Zillow, not directly but indirectly, kind of at an agency for about 5 years.
Correct. Yeah, I led the Zillow team at an agency called Deutsch in Los Angeles, and we did all the advertising. Deutsch was Zillow's original ad agency. Started advertising for them in 2005 and helped them, along with the great people at Zillow, helped put Zillow on the brand and real estate map. And when I was there, we were in full swing at the campaign. You're not just looking for a place to live, you're looking for a home. And Zillow at the time wanted to move beyond search. So they wanted to get into transactions. And they had the beginnings of the mortgage product, but it wasn't what it is now. But they were interested in iBuying. And so they started with, we at Deutsch did research for them around the product, initially called Zillow Offers, initially called Instant Offers, eventually transitioned to Zillow Offers. And we did first the product research and then the marketing research around
Why was it changed to Zillow?
There were two visceral reactions of all the learnings that we have, and there are pages worth. The two most visceral reactions people had were, one, don't call it instant. Instant is derogatory. This is my home. This is my single largest asset. You're going to give me an instant offer? It doesn't sound like you're putting very much thought into your offer. Mm-hmm. We said instant is bad. Call it Zillow. Because two, Zillow, to its credit by then, had so much equity in the brand and the name. And we said, when you're going out into the marketplace, just know that equity is going to make people feel good about trying it out. That's going to be the top of the funnel, as we call it, where people will say, oh, it's Zillow, I'll try it. The flip side of that is if it doesn't go well, for whatever reason, the offer is too low or they have a bad experience, there's going to be negative blowback on the brand. So understand the sort of vaulted position you're in now, and there's a positive and negative to that.
So I had Jeremy Waxman on my podcast, and he's the CEO of Zillow now, and he was there back then. And I asked him this question of how far can you extend a brand, right? You have Zillow, the core brand, and then instant offers, iBuying, mortgage, all of this. I mean, what would your answer
It's a great question.
be?
to Zillow's credit, and Jeremy has been in the room for a long time, so to his credit and his team's credit as well, I wouldn't say the possibilities are limitless, but I would say pretty close. Zillow has become synonymous, borderline ubiquitous, and we'll talk about the distinction there and what that means, but synonymous with real estate. So search, premier agents, iBuying, mortgage, you name it, I think they can do it. The challenge is anything they try has that same criteria I just outlined before. It'll invite people in because of the brand name, but if it doesn't go well, there's going to be blowback. And so they need to be conscious of that. And I think now, based on the learning from Zillow Offers, I get the sense that they're being more thoughtful in how they proceed.
Right. Okay, so we were, before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about this hypothesis you have on marketing and brand and real estate.
Yeah.
So give me that.
Simply put, I don't think real estate companies, and I'm doing air quotes because I mean real estate companies, any kind of company associated with real estate, not just search engines, but brokerages, multifamily, property managers, rent to own, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think they do a particularly good job of distinguishing themselves from each other. And I don't want to say it's as simple as branding, because when you say that, most real estate people and or non-marketing people say, oh, branding, you mean the logo and the colors. No, I mean the real definition of creating a brand, which is distinguishing it in someone's mind and creating perceptions and an emotional connection. I don't think real estate brands are very good at that.
Why is that?
I think it's because, one, to be fair, the product is key. The product being whether it's a single family home that someone's looking to buy or a multifamily apartment unit, the product is key. So in theory, to be fair to these companies, if you fall in love with a house, right neighborhood, right number of bedrooms, great backyard, great school district, do you really care whether the brokerage is Compass or Sotheby's or Century 21? Or probably not.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Definitely not.
The research has been done. I just did something on this. I mean, people don't care about that. They do care. Actually, interesting on there, if you're selling a home, they do care because there's going to be a sign in front of their house.
There's going to be a sign in front of their house, and there's going to be a process. My point is, so I agree. You're stating it more definitively than I am, but I agree with how definitive you are. I don't think people care. But I think there are instances in which they could or should care. So the sort of all other things being equal, which sometimes happens in real estate. For instance, I'm searching for an apartment and it's in the right part of town and it's got the amenities and building A is similar to building B, and maybe there's a little fluctuation in rent. But if all other things are equal or close to equal, don't you want to go with the apartment that is maybe, represented by a brand, a property management company that has a good reputation, that has values that you care about, that values that align with yours? I would say yes, because that's going to show up not just in their marketing campaigns, but in how they treat you as a resident, how they treat their employees. That matters.
So if all of that's true, which let's just assume it is, and I mean, I think you're probably in the top 1% quartile of people thinking about marketing and brand in real estate, right? So not necessarily for the big companies that can afford to hire you, but for the small to medium-sized companies, the people listening to this, what advice would you give to them when they start thinking about brand?
Yeah, great question. One, define it. Define it in a way that doesn't rely on the properties that you sell or the properties that you offer only.
Do you define it by aspirational, with all this buzzwords and hype, or more practical, let me just explain in simple terms what it is?
Yeah, great question. I think that's when most real estate execs roll their eyes and say, oh, we're not creating a lifestyle here or there, this or that. And I would say, actually, you are. And again, if you're buying a single family home that's been on the market, it may not matter that it's Compass versus Sotheby's, but if you're buying a new home, it matters. If you're buying it versus, from builder A versus builder B. If you're renting an apartment, again, from property managers. I come from, New York, specifically Manhattan, where I lived, where there are thousands of property managers. And shocker, they don't all have great reputations and they don't all have great brands. I would have bent over backwards to rent from someone at the time whose values, or one, who had values that I knew, and two, whose values that I appreciated and resonated with me. So one, define your brand in a way that intersects with what your consumers are looking for. Know who you are, because all the great companies, all the great brands, not just in real estate, but beyond, know who they are. And then they say, okay, here's who I am. Now, let's go look at the universe of consumers, the total addressable market. And within that, find the ones who are right for us.
Yeah.
It's too easy to say, oh, anyone who's a renter is right for us, or anyone who's a buyer who's right for us. Yes, there's a practical business application to it, but if you define yourself, you know yourself well, then the people who are really into you are going to say, yes, that's the company for me. And whereas others might say, oh, I don't know, let me explore some more. That's powerful. Again, real estate companies don't do that. They just say, oh, you know who we are? Here, look at this house. No, that's not who you are. That's what you're offering. And those two things are not the same.
Interesting. So zip back, when you were doing research with Zillow for their iBuyer program, what's something you personally learned out of that you were surprised at?
How, in that particular case, how powerful the Zillow brand equity was. And just to get into the professorial side of me, we're defining brand equity here as the associated imagery and emotions that consumers have about the brand. I knew it was resonant. I didn't know how powerful it would be.
Okay.
Which was amazing. And then part and parcel with that on a more, ground level, to Zillow's credit, the Zestimate, which they had spent, how many decades, a decade and a half up until that point, seeding and building, was incredibly resonant. If the offer that people received wasn't clearly tethered to or exactly the Zestimate, they kind of short-circuited. I don't understand, which makes sense because Zillow had spent all that time leading up to that telling people the Zestimate is the thing. And then all of a sudden to come in with an offer that's untethered to the Zestimate just short-circuited people. And we said, you have to show them the math, and you have to, even if that math is back of the napkin math and you're twisting and turning, it still has to be tethered to the Zestimate because, again, to your credit, you spent all that time establishing it.
So if you had to go back and do it all over again, if you're in the boardroom launching Zillow's iBuyer program, what's one thing you would do differently?
Well, we and I weren't responsible for the execution of it. The first part of my answer is I wouldn't change any of our recommendations. If I could, what I would change on their behalf, and perhaps Jeremy spoke to this as well, I would have moved slower. And to be fair, what I mean by slower is more thoughtfully. And I would have, again, just had a better handle on the offers. I wasn't in the room, and Jeremy obviously spoke to this, and he knows better than I could, but their offers were, one, wildly untethered to the Zestimate, and two, in many cases, really high or really low. And I think they suffered on both sides of that equation because of it. So from a recommendation, though, I wouldn't change anything. I just think it was a tricky execution, and some factors were in their control, some factors weren't.
What about from a marketing perspective? Is there anything you would change there, either for Zillow itself or for Opendoor, who's still in the game today? I don't know if you kind of see any of their marketing.
Yeah, I do. I know those folks, some of whom I worked with at an agency here in Boulder. Yeah, I think, and there's OfferPad, and,
Yeah,
and there's others. I think, again, differentiation is key. And I think of all of the iBuying brands, companies, approaches, I think OfferPad is doing the best job at differentiation and trying to create a brand. I don't think they've gotten all the way to the finish line yet, to the goal line, but I think they're doing the best job because they're trying to say something other than, look how easy, look how quick, you don't need open houses.
Yeah.
So many of these companies, and again, and I'm going across real estate now, not just iBuying, so many of these companies try to convince people to go with them simply by talking about their better mousetrap and talking about their better mousetrap more loudly and more frequently than others.
And you think that's a mistake?
I think it's a mistake for a couple of reasons. One, speaking loudly and saying the same thing more frequently is not differentiating. Two, this space is already so rife with confusion, consumers who are overwhelmed, consumers who are emotional, positively or negatively about the process. So in the face of that, to sit there and say, better rates, faster closing, no open houses.
Yeah.
It falls on deaf ears because that's not what consumers are listening for. They're listening for, who's going to take this burden away from me? Who's going to help me find a house in this awful market? Who's going to alleviate the need I have to sell this home quickly after a divorce or after, a new job offer? And yes, all of these companies, they have videos about it on YouTube, 2-minute videos, 4-minute videos, but nobody comes in and says, here's the burden we will alleviate. Here's the problem, the emotional problem we'll solve. And yes, on one hand, it's not hard for consumers to connect the dots to say, oh, no open house, faster close. Oh, okay, I see the calculation on that. That means I can do XYZ faster. But I think it's important to not only say it, but I think it's important to help consumers feel that. And again, in terms of iBuying, I think Open Door did a great job a couple years ago with their Super Bowl effort where they sold a home during halftime to show how quick and easy it was.
Right.
Very smart. I think Zillow in general has their emotional platform, and that's what they're known for. Some of the work I did, a lot of work that predates me. But what's next? What now?
Yeah.
Now they're kind of falling into the trap of, we do this too, we do that too, and it's not enough.
Mm-hmm. If you were to start a real estate agency, how would you differentiate today in today's market?
Great question. I would start with the consumer. And what I mean by that, it's a bit of a marketing cop-out to say that because it sounds too easy, but what I mean by that is, one, I would really work hard to understand the consumer, understand their real pain points. And then I would go right at it in what I would call a emotionally resonant way. We've got time and space to talk about our better mousetrap. We've got time and space to talk about how much better our rates are. We've got all those things. We've got time and space to talk about that, but I would spend time talking about what is it that you need? What is the unmet need that you have? The unmet need is not a marketplace for all of your real estate needs. The unmet need is not, XYZ better rates. What is the unmet need? And where I think that would lead us to is a more kind of human-centric real estate company. And I think back, just to jump into another category for a sec, years ago, when Esurance the company Esurance, which is eventually acquired by Allstate, launched. They talked about how insurance was stuck in the past, how it used the wrong things, and they talked about insurance for a modern world, and it was emotionally resonant. And that was a company that made people say they understand what insurance means. They're not talking about, we'll save you this amount of money. They're not talking about we have the best agents. They were talking about we understand what the unmet need is. Here's who we are. I think there's an opportunity for that in real estate.
I'll riff off that a little bit. So I just commissioned some research. I was really interested in what consumers really want in a real estate agent, and not a high form survey, but what the firm I worked with did was really in-depth 45-minute one-on-one interviews with consumers. And I feel like that's kind of the only way you can really get insights in this space.
And it has to be one-on-one because otherwise there's a weird group dynamic.
Yeah, you get the weird groupthink.
Yeah.
So the number one thing that came out of this was patience, right? Not surprising necessarily if you think about it, but I think it's interesting.
On the part of who?
That's what consumers want. They want patience from their real estate agent. Buyers and sellers, patience. So riff off that. You're the marketing and brand guy. If I did the research, I came to you and said, all right, that's that. How would you kind of spin that up into a compelling proposition?
Well, it's interesting. Just coincidentally or not, I was just watching a Zillow commercial called The Journey, and it came out about a year ago, and it was a mother and daughter's journey to find the house that's right for them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go into a lot of detail, but it's clear that they've seen a bunch of homes. It's clear that they put in offers on a lot and gotten rejected. And so that aspect of it was good and real.
Yeah.
Because it's a commercial, and in commercials, we like to tie things up with a nice bow, even more than Hollywood. Not surprisingly, after a minute or minute and a half, however long it was, it resolves with them getting the house. I think that hints at patience. What I would do, both for that commercial and to answer your question directly, is get into the nitty-gritty a little more. Show the lows and how low they truly can be. Because I think this was still a kind of polished version of it. And show the highs and how high they can be. And show the journey. Show in its true ups and downs. Versus a little blip here, a little blip there.
Yeah.
I think the thing, especially in the way the real estate market is right now, people want to know that their agents, that their companies, that their iBuyers get it. And the way you show that you get it is by saying, we understand what you're going through. Here's our interpretation of what you're going through. Is this correct?
Yeah.
And I think if you get it right, not only will consumers resoundingly say yes, but they'll say, thank you. Now I feel comfortable going with you.
Interesting. That's good advice. So CoStar and Homes.com are going after Zillow pretty strong.
Yeah.
And are you tracking their kind of brand and marketing efforts?
I am. I have, once you work in real estate, as you know, you have friends in all sorts of companies. So yeah, I have friends there as well. They're in one of my former hometowns, Richmond. So
yeah, they've got deep pockets. They've got a lot of resources. And effectively, they started with a clean slate.
Yeah.
So this doesn't necessarily need to be focused on them. But if you were going to come after Zillow,
yeah,
and keeping in mind what you're talking about, the importance of differentiation and solving problems, emotionally connecting with consumers.
Yeah.
How would you go about thinking about a brand and marketing campaign to do that?
Yeah, great question. Well, first, I think Zillow has something that CoStar doesn't, which is a lead brand that's incredibly resonant with consumers, that provides a lot of equity, that provides a halo for anything else they want to do. So,
yeah,
Zillow blank has a lot of power. CoStar blank doesn't have that power. And CoStar is a different kind of company. It's not a branded house like Zillow is. It's a house of brands.
Right.
Homes, apartments. Their brands are good, and there are varying degrees of brand equity there, but the sum is not greater than the parts. For Zillow, the sum is greater than the parts.
Right.
So for CoStar, my first approach would be, how do you make the sum greater than the parts? Because there's obviously not only a rationale to what they've done so far, but obviously they've done it with great success, but it's not laddering up to something stronger than the individual parts. So how do you ladder that on? Because Zillow may not have its, tentacles in as many businesses as Homes, but they could, based on the power of their equity. And so step one, how do you make the sum greater than the parts? Step two is, once you figure that out, whether it's from an organizational perspective or a branding perspective, I would go right at Zillow's sweet spot. And the space that I would say they have owned historically, which is the true meaning of home to people. We see, as consumers, we see brands play around in the Hallmark version of home is where the heart is and this and that. That's not deep enough. That's not real enough, because you can't take a wooden sign that you see at Home Goods and turn it into a commercial and expect to be emotionally resonant with people.
Yeah.
You've got to bring it to life. You've got to show people that what their life is like.
So if you were CoStar, that you would go at that, and you would go even deeper.
I would go even more real, even more emotionally resonant, because what real looks like now in 2025 in the real estate space is different than what real looked like in 2015 and 2005, when Zillow, first came of being. So what does it look like now? Who are consumers? What are their unmet needs? What's their journey? And let's go right at it and let them know that was the old way. This is the new way.
What are they doing now instead? How would you define?
I think it's with the caveat that I'm not fully steeped in all of their work across all of their brands. What I have seen is a kind of twofold. One, a basic play of awareness. So think about apartments.com. Jeff Goldblum doesn't come cheap, but he's quirky, he's Jeff Goldblum, he's playing a fictionalized version of himself. Is it emotionally resonant? No. Do I kind of remember the name apartments.com because of kooky Jeff Goldblum and everything they're doing?
Yeah.
Yes. So it kind of reminds me, go back a couple decades in the first, wave of online, internet company explorers, outpost.com, E-Trade, when it was just about getting the name out there.
Yeah.
So one, I think that's what they're doing.
Okay.
It costs a lot of money to go that way, and I'm sure they're spending, I haven't checked their spend, but I know it's a lot. So one, they're just doing that. Is it wrong? No. Is it as right and as potent as it could be? No. And then two, I think, for something like homes.com, which in theory you could argue is the lead horse against Zillow. It's the closest apples to apples comparison they have. Much like realtor.com, who has the generic name of the offering is also their brand. Homes.com has that. They have the Kleenex of real estate sites. I don't think they're truly leveraging that and taking advantage of that the way they could and should.
Okay. No, fair enough.
That's my nickel's worth of thinking and advice there.
So I'm going to bring up a new thing as we wrap up here. Last question I have for you, Pacaso. As the brand person for Pacaso and marketing, kind of taking everything you've talked about the past 30 minutes together. Like, what's an example, a case study, an illustration of how you put all of that knowledge and insights to work for a new brand, like Pacaso? Just one.
Great question. So I started working with Spencer and Whitney in Austin before they were Pacaso, when it was the seed of an idea and there was just a bunch of placeholder names. And they got a massive head start on me. When I came along, though, we talked about two things, really: tangibility and resonance. Tangibility because it was at best a vague concept, co-ownership, and at worst, very often confused with timeshare. And two, resonance because it's very easy in homes, as I alluded to before, to say things like home is where the heart is and well, you'll create memories. That's generic to homes in general, or generic to the home. It's very hard. Zillow owned it for a while, but in this day and age, it's very hard for any one company to own that sentiment. And I would argue you wouldn't want to anyway. So what we did, and what I did based on that, was, okay, we have to make this as real as possible. And I remember talking to them about Apple. And on one hand, everybody in marketing will laugh because Apple and Nike are the two most overused examples for any marketing or advertising conversation. But my point wasn't, be Steve Jobs, do a keynote, do all that stuff. My point was, look at what they did when they unveiled the iPod. They could have said, because the iPod, when it came along, was actually not the most technically sophisticated MP3 player. It wasn't the best. It wasn't the most intuitive. But what it was it had this ecosystem about it. It had iTunes, whereas the Microsoft Zune, you had Napster and LimeWire, and it was a patchwork quilt of confusing things. And so we didn't say talk about the ecosystem. I said, look what they talked about. The first thing they came out of the gate with was 1,000 songs in your pocket. Got it.
Right.
I, as a consumer, not only do I instantly know what that means, it's very powerful to me, because up until that point, nobody really had MP3 players. We had Walkmans and radios, and you can't have 1,000 songs in your pocket. Think about how quaint that sounds now, by the way, 1,000 songs. Now we have unlimited, but back then it was really potent. So what we talked about, what I led was, how do we distill what Pacaso is into something as pithy, clear, and emotionally resonant as that?
I'm on pins and needles. What was it?
To be fair, I don't think we got as pithy as 1,000 songs in your pocket, but second home co-ownership for 1/8 the price.
Right.
And the reason we had that line, and sure, maybe there's a pithier version, and we could have kept going, but the reason why we really liked that line, and quite honestly, it worked very well, was one, incredibly clear.
Yeah.
Two, the feature and the consumer benefit are clear. The feature is second home co-ownership. I didn't need to convince people that owning a second home was interesting to them or worthwhile. Any survey I did, interestingly, any survey I did in any country, about 3/4 of respondents wanted a second home. So I didn't need to convince people to want a second home.
Right.
I had to convince them that they could own a second home through Pacaso. So second home co-ownership for 1/8 the price. Second home is the aspiration. Co-ownership is what we offered and differentiated from timeshare, which is not ownership. And 1/8 the price, at these price points that we're talking about, that will get your attention.
I imagine this is the point where people should pause and go back 30 to 60 seconds and kind of listen to this one over and over again, because that's really good practical advice for thinking about wrapping things up. Okay, and speaking of wrapping things up, that's it. I could keep talking to you all day, but I'm out of coffee. Steve, it was awesome chatting about this. Really appreciate it.
Mike, thanks so much. So great to chat about it.
And I'm Mike Del Prete. You've been listening to Context. If you want to check out more podcast episodes or my research or join my mailing list, check out MikeDP.com. All right, thanks.